Hey friends, it's Ginny Jester here from City Mystic, New York, also Magnum Opus Tarot, and I wanted to just take a little bit of time to share with you my top 3 favorite tarot decks and maybe a couple of other fun ones too. So stick around, take a peek, and cheers! So pardon the funny angle, but I'm recording on my laptop camera, so no tripod today. But I did want to take the time and show you my all-time top 3 favorite tarot decks. And, you know, I mean, I have to say that I am partisan. Like, I know that I made the deck, and I know that it's totally, like, partial, but I am in love with City Mystic, New York. Like, I really, really love this deck. I love working with it. Every time I do a reading with it, I am glad that Chris and I battled as much as we did to make this deck, because we had some epic battles, but I do feel like it's worth it. So having said that, outside of City Mystic, New York, I'm sorry, we're all a little selfish, what can I say? But no, in truth, my top 3 favorite decks are right here in front of me, and actually none of these were my first decks. Let me move my crystals here. But all 3 of these are actually very kind of one-off decks. Sorry, my cat Otis is in the background knocking stuff down because he's mad at me that he's on a diet. So pardon the noise. But so we'll start here. Obviously, this is a very beat-up deck because, well, it's well-loved. You know, the thing about tarot boxes is that they don't really last too long. So that's par for the course. But this deck, this is Klimt Tarot. It's by Lo Scarabeo. And let me just show you what they've done. Okay, first of all, obviously, I love Gustav Klimt and his work. I love the concepts in his work. As a guy, I'm not too impressed with the history and the legacy. But as an artist, wow, I mean, and he was super rebellious at a time when it was not popular to be rebellious in Vienna, so that earns points in my book too. But if you look at these gorgeous images, what Lo Scarabeo has done is they've taken a large amount of Gustav Klimt's work, and they've composited it, so they've not taken anything that isn't his, but they've cut and spliced and put it together to make fairly readable cards. But of course, my favorite thing about these, outside of being classical, well, not classical art, but high art, is the fact that they are gilded, gold foiled. One day, I really want to do a foiled version of City Mystic, New York, but it's going to take some serious fun, so we'll see what happens. But I mean, you know, I just love the idea of a deck that's got so much light in it. I mean, it just really, you know, in some of the darker readings, some of the heavier readings, and we all know we read for stuff that's bothering us and upsetting us, so I really like to have a deck that speaks to us in that way. And what I love about this deck is the fact that it is just so bright and reflective, and I don't know, it has this very magical sort of feel to it. Something that I don't like about this deck, although it is like one of my all-time favorite decks, is that it is a little hard to read sometimes, especially in some of the cards. Like the facial expressions that Klimt created were very worried or tense or terse, and that's not exactly the meaning of the card, but the image goes really well with the meaning of the card. So there were some limitations that were made obvious by the fact that, you know, it wasn't the artist that put this deck together. It was a company that composited an artist's work. But that, nevertheless, that does not change how much I love this deck. And, you know, there is just something about that Egyptian kind of vibe that you find in this deck that speaks to the Italia legacy of tarot, and that sort of pre-Rosetta Stone sense of tarot that was developing in France. And although we know that Italia made some pretty big jumps in his translation of Egyptian writing, it's still become part of the mythology of tarot. It's still part of the culture of tarot. So I like that kickback that's in Klimt's work that speaks to, you know, ancient Egyptian culture that is also part of the culture of tarot. So that's That's the Klimt deck, and we could spend forever on that one, but I won't. I won't do it. The next deck that I really love, which is a modern deck, and it was a huge inspiration for me. I had the idea of City Mystic New York before I ever knew about this deck. But I learned about this deck when I was studying with my teacher, Diana Taylor, who reads in Treadwell's in London, and I think she's still teaching for the Tarot Professionals Academia program, which is pretty intensive. And so when I was finishing up my course with her, she was telling me about all kinds of different indie decks and, you know, cool things that were going on in the world of tarot outside of tradition. And this is one of my favorites. Now, this is a really cool story. This is Tarot of the Burrows. Check it out. So I studied with Diana in 2012 officially. So I'd been studying on my own for a while before I really took the plunge and decided to work with a teacher. In 2014, earlier this year, was when Chris and I, my graphic designer and partner, went to New York to shoot City Mystic New York. We signed up for a class at this really neat bookstore in Brooklyn called Catlands, and he's really great at finding stuff like that. So he's like, oh, we're going to be out there. We should do this. You're going to love this. It's going to be awesome. And I was like, great. Sounds awesome. Let's do it. I had no idea that the class was going to be taught by none other than Courtney Weber, the creator of this deck. We went through the whole class, and she taught with this deck through the whole class, and I did not even make the connection that this was her deck until it was like 5 minutes until the class was over, and then I freaked out because I'm such a huge fan of this deck. And this is a photographic tarot deck of the culture of New York, which is cool. It's a very different concept to City Mystic in that it's focused on people, which I love. As a photographer, I've never really enjoyed photographing people, and you know, I do enjoy photographing people sometimes, but really, like, my eye has always been on like architecture and the city environment. That's kind of where I find the mystical experience. So I thought I really appreciate what she's done here. This is not something that I can do. I can't photograph people and capture feelings like this, and I think she's done a really great job of capturing the people and the culture of New York through its people in this deck. And it's a really cool lens through tarot. It's very New York tarot in the way that she's done it, in the way that she's done the suits, the way that she's chosen to express the suits. You know, there's a certain cultural vernacular that's being spoken over there in the way that they're teaching and practicing tarot in a general sense, and it shows up here. It's so strong, and I really love that. I feel like this deck always gives me a taste of the city, like the real city, not, you know, the packaged city. And of course, obviously with City Mystic New York, that's something that I appreciate. And if you look at the backs here, it's really cool. Sorry, I'm trying not to get a glare, but it's just not going to happen for me, so I'll pull back. Yeah, but it's really cool. It's a reflected image of the city shoreline. So this is definitely one of my favorite decks. And I really like this deck for reading about situations where there's interpersonal dynamics at play. Maybe not super heavy, but you know, what's going on between people, what's going on with relationships and communication. It's so great for kind of people-centric readings, whereas, you know, the Klimt deck I really like to use for like past life type material, for instance, or you know, this deck really speaks to me on like a you know, a karmic and dharmic kind of development level. City Mystic, the feedback that we're getting about this deck is that it really reads well for deep development, to really, you know, ask yourself some deep challenging questions and work through them kind of a level. And then my third, last but not least, favorite deck is Shaloom Tarot. And the story behind this deck really fascinates me. It was made by an artist in the 70s, and he sort of reports channeling this deck and not really even knowing much about tarot. And then when he really decided that he was going to go for it and try to produce this deck, he started learning about it and realizing that what he had was a brilliant adaptation of the archetypal monomyth found in tarot to the archetypal monomyth of the Mayan culture. So the first thing that I think is really cool about this, it's a very simple, like, this is the version of the Little White Book, and obviously you're not going to get a ton of like card meetings off of it, but it's really neat. He talks a lot about the myth of Quetzalcoatl and Soloichel, his sort of half, his twin slash shadow brother. There is also a wonderful companion book to this called Flight of the Feathered Serpent that I'm reading right now, and it's like the most incredible spiritual medicine that I've been craving for a while. So this deck has like a lot of depth, and of course one of my favorite things about this deck is that it's culturally diverse. It's not a Renaissance culture, white European culture deck, which is fine. But it's nice to see brown people sometimes. I do have to say, like, it's nice to see other cultures represented in tarot. And I also love that this deck, when you take the majors and you line them out together, it makes this massive interplaying, tied together relief. Maybe I'll do a different video on that sometime and show you the whole relief that is created in the Shaloom Tarot of the major arcana. But it's this beautiful, like, 5 or 6 tiered image that tells the whole creation myth, the whole story of the Fool's journey through Mayan archetypal eyes. So that's definitely an incredible facet of this deck as well. And I like that he's used really practical symbolism for the suits. Like, wands are staffs, and pentacles are jades, and, cups are cups. So, yeah, swords are also swords, but they, it's all in that sort of Mayan code that it's written. I really enjoy this deck a lot. This deck for me is very grounding. Like, when Chris and I did City Mystic, for instance, when we were about to go to New York, we were faced with this choice. We were actually going to be building a gypsy bus and go on a festival circuit tour. And the first festival that we had lined up was Envision in Costa Rica. And, we had it lined up for months and months, but we didn't get any of the actual travel plans and necessary information until like a month before. And flight tickets had gone up so much. We're parents. We had to make arrangements, and we were going to be gone for like 4 days. So we didn't really feel like it was a good kind of a situation for us to dive into. And that made us think, well, how are we going to do this gypsy bus tour if we're not getting information and details until the last minute? We can't be responsible parents and do this realistically as much as we want to. We wanted to go share readings and my herbal products and things, and it just wasn't working out. So we took the tax money that Chris had planned on, putting into the gypsy bus and building the gypsy bus in Costa Rica, and we said, okay, Shaloom Tarot, what's going on? And we did this great reading, and it was so grounding, and it was like, okay, we need to be better stewards of our resources. We've wanted to make a deck for a long time. I've wanted to make a deck for a long time. Chris is a great graphic designer and a wizard at Photoshop. Why don't we just dive in and do this? We have the resources. His brother had temporarily moved to New York. We said, forget it, let's just do this. And so this was really like a kind of grounding voice for us. And just being able to speak that language of the Mayan culture and the deep Mana myth we looked at it not in a way of like, oh, okay, if you do this, you're going to lose all your money or that kind of thing, but it was like, what's the best way to be a steward of these resources? That's the kind of archetypal language that it elicited from us. So that's one of my favorite things about this deck. And this is an original print too. This was like 500 copies were printed in 1976, and I found it on Etsy for like $40. Are you kidding me? So those are my 3 favorite decks. Thanks so much for watching and listening. And if you're not on our mailing list already, join the mailing list where we give you a card of the day with City Mystic Tarot, as well as a weekly vibes forecast and a monthly vibes forecast looking at tarot and astrology together and sort of what's the most empowering direction for you, and it's all free. So go to ginnyjester.com where you can sign up for all of that, read more blog posts, see more articles about all the decks listed here and more. And I can't wait to see you next time. Subscribe if you like what you're seeing. I've got a whole free Astrology Foundations crash course on my site and on my channel. So I hope you get to spend some time here and soak up all the free goodies. And I'm sure I'll see you next time. Bye.